Welcome to episode 3 of Coffees and Countries with Christoph. Today, focusing on the country of Rwanda. First off, starting with our intro theme music there, A Decent Cup of Coffee. The intro there comes from an extremely sexist ad put out there by Folgers. Not only does this guy just roast his wife's coffee, he then goes on to explain that the ladies at work make a better cup of coffee, goes off to probably harass those same ladies for the whole day, and comes back to his wife who's made some Folgers instant coffee, and now all of a sudden, he respects his wife, which is just terrible. So don't drink Folgers. A couple weeks ago, I shifted to Maxwell House. Not sure, why I did that, but now, happy that I did. So, Folgers, garbage people, instant coffee's garbage anyway. Ignore that for now. So today, anyway, we're talking about Rwanda. And Rwanda is here, East Africa, like all these other places we've been, talking about Tanzania, Burundi, and we're going to talk a little bit about why are we all over here in East Africa talking about these places? And here's their flag down here. So first, we're going to look at the physical geography and some of their early history. We're going to talk about some other topics. A lot of the topics with Rwanda go with Burundi, so we're just going to kind of veer off into more general discussions. But we'll talk about the '94 genocide, the most big topic in recent history in Rwanda, and inspiration for classic, one of my favorite movies, Hotel Rwanda, starring Cheadle. The movie was snubbed for a 2005 Oscar. And finally, we'll talk about mountain gorillas. So first of all, Rwanda, here in the East African highlands, lots of mountains, lots of deep lakes like Tanzania, like Burundi that we've talked about, borders both of those countries. So why in the world is all this coffee coming from here? Well, one, the altitude has a lot to do with it. For some reason, coffee grows better in higher altitudes, and you can see the highest point in Rwanda is 15,000 feet above sea level, and the lowest point is still 3,000 feet above sea level. Africa kind of goes in a staircase starting from the west and working to the east, and gets higher and higher in sea level as you move east. So the eastern part of Africa is good for growing coffee with that elevation. Another good part is it's part of the Great Rift Valley that we talked about in another Coffee and Countries episode, which led to, you have tectonic plates moving, you have a lot of volcanoes and volcanic activity that has resulted in a lot of the nutrients that are good for growing coffee beans. High quality coffee comes from that volcanic soil. The capital of Rwanda is Kigali, 745,261 people. Its major industries are tourism. We'll talk about that. A lot of that has to do with going to see the mountain gorillas. One of the few places in the world you can see that, especially safely. Minerals, coffee, and tea. Now, coffee is 24% of all exports in Rwanda, and like we talked about Burundi, Cameron was exploiting this system where they're growing all of this coffee and exporting all of it, not enjoying it. Although that one person, got somebody addicted to caffeine and probably ruined their life. Rwanda is a similar situation, but Rwanda is actually encouraging its people to start drinking their own coffee. So in terms of moral hierarchy of people I know, surprisingly, Misha comes out on top of Cameron slightly, just because Rwanda, they're more okay with starting to drink their own coffee. There are 450,000 coffee farms in Rwanda, mostly small farmers, like you can see in the picture down here. It's actually probably a little bit of a larger operation, about 1 acre farms. Rwanda, not always known for its coffee beans, kind of run of the mill, but Rwanda's also started to focus on growing more high quality coffee beans. And surprisingly, one of the things I found is almost all of Rwanda's coffee beans go to Japan. Japan is the biggest buyer of Rwandan coffee, which begs the question, after commenting that he's possibly, a moral person here, how did Misha get these coffee beans that normally end up in Japan? A lot of speculation, a lot of talk over the years that it's a Russian spy um, altering 2016 election. Um, could it be that he's working with the Japanese in there too? I'm not, saying for sure. Just asking questions here, questions that the people need to know. So moving on to talk about the early history of Rwanda. Hold on, my notes are all over the place here. We're gonna, a lot of the early history of Rwanda is similar to Burundi. They have the same Hutu, Tutsi, Twa dynamic that Burundi had, and a lot of the fighting that came with it. So one thing that I'm going to focus on is, why do hunters and gatherers, like the people that settled in Rwanda, why do they settle? And when I'm talking about settling, I'm not talking about settling down in a relationship, which you should never settle. You should never settle. In the words of Leslie Knope, you are a beautiful, talented, brilliant, powerful muskox, and you should find someone that treats you as such. And with the muskox, it must be emphasized that according to the University of Calgary, a captive muskox is never a domesticated animal. They're never docile. They're tamed wild beasts. And you need to address this with any romantic relationship that you have, or it's doomed to fail. That's why I introduce myself to women as Michael Muskox, and explain, you're not going to tame this muskox. You can't stop me. I'm not going to settle. I'm constantly, constantly improving. And so trust me, that works. And if it doesn't, you don't want them anyway. You can have your ordinary love. I want to be drowned in passion and ravished every night. I don't know what that means. It sounds exhausting, and it is. But that's life. Don't settle. So the pros and cons here of hunting and gathering. What was it like before these people started to settle in Rwanda? What was it like for the first people that came there? Well, and this is true all across the world. Before there were any civilizations, everyone was hunting and gathering. And there were a lot of benefits to this. When we look back in the archaeological record, you look at bands of hunters and gatherers that have been found. It's found that these people had better nutrition compared to the first people that started farming. They were eating wide varieties of foods. You can think about if you're wandering through a plain, some forested areas, you're going to find all kinds of various types of berries and nuts and different types of small game that you're going to be hunting and eating. And one of those things, nuts are very important too, because in hunters and gatherers, there was little sign of tooth decay. They never had cavities because they're eating these harder, crunchier things, naturally chipped away the plaque. So they didn't have toothpaste or anything to go to the dentist back then, but they also didn't need to. They're not eating a bunch of sugary stuff. And again, eating crunchy things kind of chips away that stuff at your teeth. They also had more free time. On average, it's estimated that hunters and gatherers work for maybe 3 to 5 hours of work a day. Basically, you wake up and your job is go find food so you don't starve, and then you're done. So you can do whatever you want with the rest of your day. So that's kind of cool. They weren't working necessarily all that hard most of the time. Now, if you get in a situation, maybe it's been dry for a while, you might have to go search a little bit harder to find that food, which gets into some of the cons. But before I get there, another pro of hunting and gathering is it gave us domesticated dogs. In trying to be a better hunter, people would have discovered that hunting with wolves that they had tamed was a good way to hunt. These wolves probably had some sort of genetic defect that made them not afraid of people, but worked out for humans because they could work together with the domesticated wolves to hunt animals further away. Figure out, hey, there's a deer, like a mile away that I can't even see. but I can work together with this dog to do it. So if you like dogs, that started with hunters and gatherers. The cons of this is there's no surplus of food. You're constantly moving, so you don't really want to, kill like 1,000-pound ox. You're not going to be dragging all of that with you, because you're got to be constantly on the move. So your job, everyone's job, is always around finding that food, and it may be a quick couple hours one day. It may be a lot of hours next day. There's a lot of uncertainty that goes around with it, but everyone's working towards that one goal of not starving. Which gets us into the pros and cons of agriculture. The biggest pro of agriculture is not everyone has to produce food. You're more productive with the land. You can pick out the very best grains and replant them, and you should get more the next year. You can also grow extra food that you don't need to store for the future, which again frees up more people to work on other things, to maybe come up with some technological improvements to create even more food. You have your more complicated systems of government that come from settling down. Philosophical ideas, all of that probably comes from settling down. Now, the cons of this is if your crops fail, you are just done. If you are not a good farmer and you fail one year, you better get back to hunting and gathering and figuring it out fast. Especially if you don't grow enough to get through the winter, you gotta get moving. It's also a lot of work. Said hunters and gatherers probably average 3 to 5 hours of work per day. The first farmers worked way harder than that. And it shows in the archaeological record. When we look at the first agricultural societies, these people had arthritis everywhere, especially in their knees if it was somebody grinding corn, and their elbows if they were harvesting. I mean, these people worked their butts off, and it hurt them. The first farmers were shorter, they died quicker, they had way worse nutrition compared to their hunting and gathering people at the same time, because they're also eating a terrible diet. They're mostly having sugary grains, their teeth are rotting, they're not getting as much protein, they're just not living great lives at first. There's also a lot of accidents that go with farming, using equipment to farm. You're going to have a lot of broken limbs, holes in where people got struck with, farm equipment on accident. You also have a lot of fighting that comes from this. Like I said, if your crops fail, you're going to die. So competing villages next to each other, one's crops fail, they're going to go try to kill all the people in the next village to take their crops. You get hangry, you'll kill people, you'll eat people. And so they fought a lot, and this is kind of the, not saying that hunters and gatherers couldn't have some infighting, but, large scale warfare coming out of agriculture. And also a lot of diseases. Some of the people that started farming also start to, fence in animals and live next to them, introduces a lot more disease to people. So hunters and gatherers in agricultural groups actually live next to each other for a long time. So why did agriculture win out? Why are there so few hunters and gatherers? Well, the answer is, like everything, is climate change. After the last great ice age, areas of the earth started to see shortages of wild food. Places, especially like the Middle East, known as the Fertile Crescent, people had to start farming to ensure they had enough food. With all the people living there, they couldn't all keep wandering and keep finding wild food growing. So places there started this process of agriculture and then started, improving on it and spreading. Now, there are some places, it wasn't inevitable that agriculture would win out. Places like Australia, the Aborigines, the U.S. plains where Native Americans were hunting bison in the Pacific Northwest, and along the Mississippi River where a lot of people fishing. Northern Europe, reindeer hunting societies all resisted to change to agriculture the longest because the climates did not force them to. An interesting read on this is a book called The Art of Not Being Governed, which talks about nomadic hunting gathering societies in Southeast Asia today that still exist. Some of the political conclusions that the author comes to are kind of garbage, but a lot of the stuff about how hunting-gathering societies can be organized and resist being forced to adopt agriculture is pretty interesting. Now, the biggest historical event in Rwanda's history is no doubt the 94 genocide of Tutsis by Hutus, one of the worst in history, and all started with post-colonial era. Rwanda had been ruled by Germans and Belgians, just like Burundi, and the Belgians put back the Tutsis back into power. And along with Burundi's president, we have this event where the Rwandan president is killed in a strike on an airplane. And so the Hutus start going on a genocide of Tutsis. Around 1 million people died. 70% of all the Tutsis in Rwanda, a third of the Twa. Again, these Twa, kind of the shortest when we looked back at those ethnic groups, and kind of always discriminated against. But 20% of Rwanda's whole population is killed in this genocide. It's the equivalent of like 65.5 million Americans died. So the ramifications of this are huge. The country's been recovering since then, and it's actually one of 3 countries with a majority female national legislative body. Their parliament, I think, is like 60% women. Which is they were the first to have a majority female parliament, along with later Cuba and Bolivia do today. And you're like, cool, that's awesome. But it's not because they're like a super pro feminist country. It's because the genocide killed a ton of their men. At the end of the genocide, it's estimated that 70% of their population was female, which it should obviously be about 50-50. So crazy at the extent that this genocide goes. Now, as a social studies teacher, you got to always be on the alert for great movies. Sometimes the kids get tired of just watching you watch basketball film and old basketball movies. So you got to change up what you're doing. It's very important in teaching. You can't just watch basketball. You've got to change it up. And switching sports doesn't just work all the time either. So you got to throw in the actual educational movie every now and then. So that's where Hotel Rwanda comes in. This is a great movie, one of my favorites. Snubbed at the Oscars in more ways than one. Don Cheadle, the lead actor here, was up for Best Actor, and I think we had Best Supporting Actress. But the film didn't get up there for Film of the Year or whatever they call it at the Oscars. Which is just terrible. So I'm just going to kind of go through here. The beginning of this movie, we have some Hutu guy talking on the radio, some propaganda against the Tutsis. He's talking about how the Tutsis worked with the Belgians, and they're all just a leftover from the colonial era of Rwanda, which is obviously bad. But definitely propaganda trying to rile up the rest of the Hutus in the country to go out and attack Tutsis. Now, this is where we're introduced to Don Cheadle's character. And Don Cheadle, at the beginning of this movie, he undergoes vast transformation and great acting here. He was beat out for Best Actor by Jamie Foxx in Ray, as Ray Charles beat him out, which, okay, I understand, but Don Cheadle, could have understandably been there. But Don Cheadle's character at the beginning of this is chumming it up, with some white people at the airport. We have him trading some fine cigars, being a smooth talking businessman, but also a smooth talking businessman, with a heart of gold. He is a Hutu, so he is safe throughout all of this for the most part. He gets into some danger later, we'll talk about. But he actually saves his Tutsi driver from a mob. So we get this idea that, Don Cheadle here, he's in it, he's a little bit better off than, everybody else around him, but he has what's best for others, in his heart. He's one to protect people. Well, then right after that, some of the lobsters that they picked up from the airport, like half of them are dead when they get back, so these are not something you should serve to guests. And then we see him recommend the lobster to a UN general, which is kind of weird. It's played by Nick Nolte, and we'll get to him later too. So later on, he goes home after serving his guests rotten lobster, probably spreading E. coli and food poisoning throughout his hotel. And we see him and his wife witness the Hutu army just beating this Tutsi guy. And his wife is Tutsi. So his wife wants him to start using his contacts to kind of do something about that. Don Cheadle is kind of a jerk to his wife about this. Don Cheadle's basically like, whatever, like the process is going to take out, there's a peace process going on, we're fine. Just kind of, shut up, let this happen, and everything will be fine later. So he's kind of a jerk about that. Next, we go back to the hotel, and there's some guy at the bar at this hotel that's explaining the origins of the conflict to Joaquin Phoenix, who is playing a cameraman for a news crew covering the Rwandan peace talks. And Joaquin Phoenix, the guy does a pretty good job of accurately explaining what's going on in Rwanda. But then Joaquin Phoenix just goes around creepily, like asking women whether they're Hutu or Tutsi, and then talks about how he can't even tell the difference. Supposed to make a point about, these people are basically the same, but super creepy. Joaquin Phoenix, yeah, he's a creepy guy in this movie. Probably a creepy. I don't know. I don't know how creepy he actually is. But anyway, Don Cheadle goes home from work, and I can't read my notes here. His house looks like it's abandoned. Oh wait, no, yeah. So he goes home from work, and there's like houses on fire and stuff on his way home, shooting going on, and his house is abandoned. And he's freaking out. He's running through, and can't find anybody. But finally, finds a group of people armed with hammers, hiding with his wife and kids, minus one of the kids who decide to go hide in a bush. And Don Cheadle goes and finds him, carries him back in. He's covered in blood. Seems like he's about to die, but then find out that it's somebody else's blood. But safe to say, this kid is traumatized for a few days, but then also probably for the rest of his life. Later on, we find out that Don Cheadle's faith in this process, the peace process working, is not going to happen. The Hutu radio guy is back on, and he's claiming that the Tutsis killed the Hutu president. The Rwandan army shows up, or the Hutu army shows up, and they want Don Cheadle to take him to the hotel. They find out, at first they want to just take Don Cheadle, but Don Cheadle basically talks them into letting his family come with him. He's not leaving his family behind with these people. And they see all kinds of fighting and bodies everywhere on the way to the hotel. So he takes the Hutus to the safe of the hotel, pockets a couple thousands for himself in cash. Ethically questionable at the time, but we see where this is going in a minute. So the army finds out that his family are a bunch of Tutsis. His wife's side's all Tutsis, and that's who he brought with him. And they give Don Cheadle a pistol, like, hey, kill your family. So Don Cheadle gives the army, all the money he took out to basically just not kill them. Meanwhile, Don Cheadle just saved his family from being murdered. He's seconds away from having to shoot his own family. Goes back into the hotel lobby, and we've got about a dozen Karens want to speak to the manager, which is Don Cheadle, at the rest of the hotel, demanding, like their room's not right, or food's not good. And the dude just, like, this happened right outside the hotel. Did they not see him have to just save his family? So he keeps his composure. He kind of saves the rest of his family too, but he still has these Karens at the desk just nonstop badgering him throughout the movie until they finally get out of there. So Don Cheadle avoids the Karens, Then goes up and takes his family to a room where he complains about the poor job the housekeeping's doing. Don Cheadle very loyal about his job to this company that seems to ultimately not really care about him too much, although they're kind of wish-washy in how they portray that. Um, he goes back to the desk. He deals with the Karens, and these people cannot get out of Rwanda fast enough. But good, they're annoying. I want them out of this movie anyway. So good on them for getting rid of them. So one of his employees finds out that Don Cheadle is hiding all of these Tootsies, and he uses this to take the presidential suite of the hotel and basically just cycles through the ladies that he has coming to visit him in this room. And he's taking all the beer, he's taking all the booze, and he's Don Cheadle's like, "Hey, you better get back to work. I mean it. I'm the manager of this hotel." And the guy's like, "Well, yeah, I'll tell the Hutus that your family's Tootsies." And so Don Cheadle just kind of lets him. Um, After this, we get a white lady that's not a Karen shows up for working for the Red Cross. She has a dozen Tootsie kids that Don Cheadle puts into a room and is like, "All right, hey, I'll save some of them, cool, whatever." And she's like, "Hey, I've got like a dozen more. I'm coming back." Don Cheadle's like, "No, I can't take any more. I don't have any more space for them." And then he's like, "Wait a minute. If you go find my wife's family, I'll take some more of them if you can find them." And we find out that Red Cross lady is pretty cool, and she's like, "Yeah, I'll go try to find them." Um, Don Cheadle then, let me see here. He starts freaking out. I mean, he saw people die, and his main concern here is about losing his job for using rooms in the hotel to protect his family and kids. So he freaks out, still worrying more about his job than the fact that he's seen people die here. And he's got orphans that he's got to take care of now. Which he puts one of the hotel's employees on, basically caring for 20 kids, and she seems super happy. Would love to have seen more of her backstory. Like, why is she so happy to care for 20 kids? But good on her. We go back to Joaquin Phoenix complaining to his boss that he wants to get out of there. His boss says no, we've got stories to report on. And so Joaquin Phoenix kind of complaining about that. Don Cheadle gets a call from his Belgian owner, which, holy crap, Rwanda, an independent country, its fanciest hotel, still owned by someone in Belgium. They're colonizers for hundreds of years. What the crap? But he assures the Belgian owner that the hotel can stay open. The Belgian owner's like, "Hey, if things get worse, you gotta let me know because we gotta close this place." So Don Cheadle then goes and demands loyalty from his employees, basically like, "You will not stop working or I will kick you out of here." And you can hear what's going on outside of these hotel walls. Joaquin Phoenix then shows back up. He has footage of massacre going on, of Hutus massacring Tutsis. Joaquin Phoenix is super pessimistic that this footage is ever going to, cause anybody to help. Don Cheadle actually a little more optimistic. He's like, "No, when people see this around the world, they're going to have to come and help us." Meanwhile, we've got Hutu rebels are starting to kill UN troops, it looks like. And the UN troops show up at the hotel with more refugees. We find out, the not Karen Red Cross worker shows back up, and we find out that the Hutus made her watch as they killed orphans. Holy crap. But ultimately we get Don Cheadle's optimism comes through, and that when people saw this footage, they're going to come help. And we have some European, Belgian, French, Canadian soldiers showing up to the hotel, and they're going to save the day. Psych. The Canadian UN general, played by Nick Nolte, tells Don Cheadle that they are all abandoning Don Cheadle and Rwanda. And kind of it's a true statement in context, makes sense, but kind of unnecessarily racist way of putting it. They're abandoning Rwanda and nobody cares about them. So Hutu forces arrive after most of the troops abandon the hotel. Don Cheadle buys some time by giving them beer. He does this a lot throughout, and it works. The power of alcohol is real. Um, he calls the hotel owner, again, this Belgian dude, still colonizing the country, extracting wealth from it. And he actually does something good here. He calls the French and says, "Hey, you're giving these Hutu rebels weapons and funding them. Get them out of here." And it works. But the owner basically calls back. He's like, "Yeah, that's one time I can help you. I'm kind of done here," and he doesn't show up anymore. So Don Cheadle's like, "I got to get food for these people. We've been, we're running out of food." So he goes to some Hutu restaurant owner who also turns out to be some sort of warlord who has turned his restaurant into just this crazy dystopian, like barracks for the Hutus. Um, Gives Don Cheadle the food that he asks for. Doesn't have any whiskey, which turns out to be important later on. Don Cheadle's been bribing Rwandan general to protect his hotel with whiskey. But basically, this restaurant owner is ready to kill all the Hutsis there and threatens Don Cheadle's Tutsi family. So the restaurant guy sends Don Cheadle down a road that he tells him is safe to drive back on. Turns out it's a mass grave with a bunch of dead bodies. Don Cheadle, gets back to the hotel, rightfully has a mental breakdown at this point. First kind of mental breakdown about what he's actually seen instead of like saving his job. By that night, Don Cheadle looks like he gets it back together. He's going to sit down, have a romantic dinner with his wife on the hotel roof. But psych, instead of using it as a romantic dinner, he tells her how he bribed an old boss with a Volkswagen to make her work next to him so that they could get married. And then keeps that mood going by telling his wife that if the Hutus show up and start shooting people, to take the kids to the roof of the hotel and jump off. So Don Cheadle, why did he set up this romantic evening with wine and stuff on the hotel roof? If that's what he's going to tell his wife, then that seems like the setting for that. But nonetheless, the UN general comes back with exit visas for some of the families. This includes Don Cheadle's family, but not his in-laws. So they have to be got ready to leave by 7 a.m. the next morning. Don Cheadle is about to get on the van with his family that's leaving, decided that he's going to let them go without him. He's going to stay at the hotel to try to help people. His family's pissed. Noble of him, but he didn't talk about it with any of his family. Just at the last minute, he's like, "See ya." So kind of weird. But doesn't end up happening anyway. Because he finds out that the Hutu are going to ambush this UN convoy. So the UN general, Nick Nolte, he's holding off all the Hutus. The UN trucks are, got to go back to the hotel. They're almost all killed after shooting starts. Don Cheadle reunited with his wife and family. She's pissed at him, but they do talk it out. Later, we get the Rwandan general completely bails on Don Cheadle after he finds out he doesn't have any more whiskey. Hutu fires an RPG into the hotel. The water's cut off, so they're drinking the pool water. I'm not sure how you get chlorine out of pool water, but they're like cooking and eating or drinking this stuff. The UN general Nick Nolte gets a prisoner swap arranged for 2 days if they can hold out. Where basically they'll give the Hutus a bunch of people that the UN has taken prisoner, and the people at the hotel will be allowed to go behind enemy lines and be kind of safe in a refugee camp there. Don Cheadle takes the Rwandan general they've been bribing with whiskey to go get some whiskey. The general doesn't want to take Don Cheadle back to the hotel after they go get the whiskey. Don Cheadle's like, "Hey, I've been around all these white people back at the hotel. They all say you're committing war crimes, and if you don't take me back, I'm the only one that knows you're not committing war crimes, so I'm not gonna defend you." So the general's like, "Okay, I gotta take this guy back." So they takes him back. They find the Hutus have overrun the place when they get there. Don Cheadle's freaking out because it looks like his wife did what she was supposed to and took the kids to the roof and jumped off, but luckily she's smarter than that, and they hid in a bathtub, so they're safe. The UN gets everyone out of the hotel. They pass a bunch of fighting on their way to safety. Buses are at a refugee camp there to take them across the border to Tanzania. Looks like they're about to, Don Cheadle's family's about to leave. Red Cross lady sees them, stops the bus, holds up everybody's trip to Tanzania, but luckily it's to get Don Cheadle and his wife, their niece and nephew. And that's kind of the end of the movie here. Real life, Don Cheadle, Paul is his name, saved over 1,000 people. They live in Belgium today with his wife and kids and his adopted niece and nephew. The Rwandan general and the restaurant warlord were charged with war crimes. And the genocide ended after the Tutsis drove the Hutus into the Congo, which kind of just spread the conflict to there. So again, great movie, as you can tell. Go watch it. Don't take my summary as representative of its greatness, but man, it's good. So like I said, there's a lot of big Oscar snub, like the Aviator one or something. Like, come on. Kate Blanchett beat out Don Cheadle's wife for supporting actress, which is terrible. And then, weirdly enough, this was a terrible year for animated movies in the Oscars. Shark Tale was nominated for an Oscar. All right, so anyway, mountain gorillas are where we're going to end up here. Mountain gorillas. Rwanda, one of 3 countries in the world where you can find mountain gorillas, critically endangered. Only around 1,000 left, and they're in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These are not great places to be if you're a critically endangered species. We've got genocide and civil war in Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, dealing with years of dictatorship and infighting. So a lot of the pressure on mountain gorillas comes from all of the chaos going on in human society around them. The actual species name of the mountain gorillas comes from some German guy that shot 2 of them and took them back to Berlin. They're like, oh, name the species after him. So that's kind of weird. Like, he didn't do any science. He's just like, oh, gorilla, shoot them and take them back. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll name this after you. Cool. So kind of weird. We should think about doing something about that. But Rwanda is good news. Their population of mountain gorillas is up by 25%. They've done a lot to save mountain gorillas. But mountain gorillas are cool. They have a complex social group. They're led by silverbacks, which you can see in this picture here is a good picture of a family group. They can live in groups of up to 30, mostly smaller than that though. And they're led by a dominant male who makes all the decisions for the group. And it's notable with usually they have more of the silver hair on their backs. You can see there's some that have other, silver hair, but usually the dominant one has the most. And they hold their sets. They're, these huge creatures. I mean, muscle, like you would not want to mess with one of these things. They'll rip your arms off each face, they'll get you. But they're actually pretty peaceful. They don't use violence a whole lot, not even against each other. They mostly just use displays of aggression, and they're smart enough that like if somebody's way bigger than them, they're like, okay, I get it. You're standing up, you're throwing stuff at me, pounding your chest. I'll back off. Now, this is important because silverbacks need to hold on to their position. Without silverbacks, these family groups do not do well. When a silverback dies, if there's no heir apparent within the group to step up and be the dominant male, it can lead to different male gorillas killing all the infants in the group not being able to make decisions on where to go to forage for food, so it can be bad. So that is way over on time, but there is a ton of information on Rwanda. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episode on Ethiopia.